looks really rushed.
Yeah, it looks very like lacking, you know?
It doesn't look realistic to me.
It doesn't look good.
Yeah, it's like missing something.
I think my 5-year-old cousin can do that in 5
Hey
minutes.
guys, I heard something about what you said about this art form. Though it's unique and quite out of this world, but I think you guys should watch this documentary it's found on Netflix.
The Impressionist movement started in France during the Second French Empire around the late 1800s. Impressionist paintings consist of short, thick, and bold strokes of unblended colors of paint, providing depth and volume as if the painting is seeping out of the canvas. This technique is known as impasto. Impasto is a painting technique where paint is laid on the surface thickly, thick enough that the brushstrokes are kind of visible. The impasto technique used in Impressionist art make the paintings appear much more vivid, not focusing on the finer details, and often so the subjects look a bit distorted or exaggerated, as if it is almost abstract looking, so that viewers will focus on the painting as a whole rather than focusing on a single subject. Impressionist art concepts totally differ from the previous art period, the Baroque era, as paintings usually emphasize dramatic, exaggerated human emotions. Baroque paintings are easy to interpret, easy to recognize and digest, as they look much more realistic in terms of minute details, in contrast to the abstract-like nature of Impressionist art. Art doesn't have to look realistic all the time. There are so many different styles of art that have completely disregarded any sense of realism or logic. Good art is something that makes you think. Impressionism aims to capture scenes, creating works that reflect the world we live in. Impressionists rebelled against the classical subject matter, and it shows that art does not have to be held to the same standards as to what has been produced before.
The history of Impressionism. Beginning at some point in the 1860s and regarded as one of the most revolutionary movements in the field of art and literature, Impressionism made thunderous waves into the art scene. Its predecessor, Realism, mandated the idealistic topics of the artworks of the period. They focused on idealized nudity, classical and mythological narratives, and glorified depictions of nature. With art being different for every artist, many pieces did not make the final cut for the 1863 art salon. Numerous artists became enraged, and feelings of anger and dissatisfaction resulted in the infamous 1863 Salon of the Refused. The exhibition of the Salon of the Refused was so groundbreaking that a group of unacknowledged French painters free from the then reigning Paris Salon, previously identified as the Anonymous Society of Artists, organized an exhibit in photographer Felix Nadar's studio. The display contains the works of Claude Monet, Edgar Degas, Camille Pissarro, Pierre-Auguste Renoir, Alfred Sisley, and Bert Morisot, to name a few. Approximately 200 pieces got pedestaled and were open to the public. You may wonder how Impressionism or Impressionists got coined, and it is this well-known story of Louis Leroy, a French critic who we credit. During the 1874 exhibit, Leroy's seething review catalyzed the movement's title. After seeing Monet's work, Impression, sunshine. Leroy stated, Impression, I was sure of it. Since I was impressed, I told myself there had to be some impression in it. And what freedom! What ease of quality! Wallpaper in its embryonic state is more finished than that seascape. Instead of taking this negatively, the artist claimed the moniker. From then on, they became known as the Impressionists unofficially. The momentous event made history as it was Paris's first time to see a large-scale independent exhibition of avant-garde art, a direct challenge to the salon, the traditional subject matter and methods, and the art world overall. However, though not yet united by a particular style, the Impressionists shared a disdain for the overbearing standards of academic fine art and proceeded to join the Anonymous Society of Artists. The organization had regular meetups. Along popular venues were cafes. Monet, Renoir, Pissarro, Degas, Sisley, and more frequently visited a specific cafe called Café Gerbois. These young artists decided to paint what they saw very simply, crystallizing the moment of what they thought and felt. They just weren't interested in painting historical figures and moments, mythology, or even perfecting visual appearances. The exhibitions the society has held cost them more money than earnings, primarily because they are the rejects. They have limited financial success, so the company was crucial in establishing their financial solvency. Their exhibits became widely successful, garnering thousands of attendees every time. Despite the attention, most of the group struggled to sell their works and remained incredibly poor. But it is to be noted that on their third show, held in 1877, the group crystallized their name as Impressionists.
The early Impressionist painters such as Claude Monet, Camille Pissarro, Alfred Sisley, and Edgar Degas were brought together by their desire to abandon the rigid conventions of academic painting. The artist wanted to be free from Academy Debut Arts and its annual salon in particular, which was at the time considered to be the greatest art show in the Western world. Even though Monet's art received little immediate praise from critics, collectors remained devoted to him throughout his career, especially Americans who came across his work in the 1880s. He had a significant impact on a variety of painters, from his close contemporaries like Vincent van Gogh to a fresh new generation of artists like Emily Bernard, Pierre Bonnard, Henri Matisse, and Maurice de Vlaminck. He was surrounded by an artist community in Giverny that was largely made up of American artists from 1886 to 1914, and they looked up to him as an example of a modern French painter. During that time, they copied his vibrant color scheme, engaging themes, and impulsive manner, eventually introducing these components to American painting. Also, an important figure in the development of Impressionism was Camille Pissarro. In some ways, he was the prototypical Impressionist because of his unwavering faith in the need for separate group exhibits and his dedication to portraying landscapes in particular weather and lighting circumstances. By the end of his life, he was starting to gain praise and critical acclaim. This perception persisted throughout the 20th century when critics and academics consistently acknowledged his significance to Impressionism. In both his work and personal life, Pissarro united the 19th and 20th century. Despite his modest demeanor, Pissarro's legacy, his unwavering desire for change, his influence on important painters like Cézanne and Gauguin, and his unwavering antagonism to the creative establishment strongly influenced the evolution of the early 20th century avant-garde. Lastly, Degas's genius can be summed up in his capacity to explore the language of art to a greater extent than any of his contemporaries, while maintaining focus on his subject, the human animal in its most public and private moments. He incorporated sensuality with assiduously observed detail and commitment to a visual structure, uniting a romantic sensibility with a classic mastery of his resources. Degas's work has been overly simplified or categorized more than that of the other Impressionists. In reality, the transition from the gloomy academicism of his youth to the full-blooded social realism of the 1870s, and finally to the pyrotechnical, defiant breadth of his final two- and three-dimensional work, is among the most impressive of the modern era. In a single lifetime, Degas renounced the security of a state-controlled historical culture in favor of a form of art that reflected personal crisis, even among close to the nihilism of the succeeding generation. The trajectory of Degas' reputation has been peculiar, gaining sharply throughout his mature years but suffering from both his old age's resentful retreat and the new century's taste for non-figurative styles. Although he was recognized in later decades, formalist criticism frequently marginalized him and reduced him to the status of a mere social commentator. With specialized publication on Degas's portraits, drawings, prints, monotypes, notebooks, and sculpture, as well as an increasing number of well-attended shows, the 1960s and 1970s witnessed the beginnings of a significant re-evaluation of Degas's relevance. Feminist critics used his artwork as a platform to debate the artist's purported misogyny and the obsceneness of his backstage and brothel scenes. Degas's self-aware elusiveness in many of his depictions, as well as his underappreciated departure from current events in his later years, have both received increased recognition in recent years. Such discussions and discoveries continue to draw sizable crowds and inspire curators, scholars, and working artists, indicating that Degas's true stature has not yet been fully determined. The open composition emphasis on realistic representation of light in its varying qualities, often emphasizing the effects of time passing. Inclusion of movement as a fundamental element of human perception and experience, and odd visual angles are all features of Impressionist paintings. The later developments of Impressionism, the Impressionists met together frequently to talk about their works and exhibits, despite the fact that they were a heterogeneous bunch. Between 1874 and 1886, the group worked together on 8 shows, although throughout this time, their unity as a group was gradually deteriorating. A lot of people wanted to move on and pursue different creative outlets since they believed they had mastered the early experimental styles that had garnered them much acclaim. Others, concerned about the work's ongoing commercial failure, shifted their approach stylistically in the hopes of increasing sales or patronage.
The fast development of France also started up the quick change of paintings, in comparison with its predecessor who painted moralistic, religious, or political events in the past. Impressionists made paintings of what their eyes see: the daily life of people, the railroads, the morning sun. Images of suburban and rural leisures outside of Paris were popular subject for the Impressionists, while some of the Impressionists, such as Pissarro, focused on the daily life of local villagers. During this era of art, attention was shifted to the artist's manipulation of color, tone, and texture to the subject. It sparked a new art style for color composition, with the emergence of neo-impressionists. Paints are more vibrant because of their amazing use of color theory. Shadows are not just black, colors contrasts. Artists were free to paint what they choose to paint. It gave freedom to art, but the best part of Impressionism is the art itself. It's visually calming to the eyes, a subtle and natural change of subject. It is not distressing, moralistic, or even violent. It paints a picture of history with an interesting new approach that is not overtly complicated, yet still recognizable. Created by talented artists who sees the subject not just as they are, but just as how they appear.